He spent his last $5 on a forgotten diner. But his retired K9 uncovered a secret that powerful people would kill to own. At dawn, a homeless former Navy SEAL stood in a freezing bus station with only $5 left and nowhere to go. One desperate decision sent him to an abandoned diner hidden deep in the Wyoming mountains. But the moment his loyal German shepherd stepped inside, he sensed something buried beneath the floor, something that would expose a forgotten soldier's final mission, ignite a battle over millions of dollars, and change an entire town forever. Engagement. Before we begin, comment 1 if you would have taken the same chance, or 0 if you would have walked away, and tell us where you're watching from. The digital clock above Gate 3 blinked 4:18 a.m. Every few seconds the display dimmed, then brightened again, as if even time itself had grown tired of waiting inside the old bus station in Grand Junction, Colorado. Outside, November wind pushed dry snow across the empty parking lot. The flakes skated over cracked pavement beneath pale yellow streetlights that hummed with a lonely persistence. A freight train wailed somewhere beyond the warehouses, its distant horn echoing through the darkness like a memory that refused to fade. Caleb Hayes sat alone beneath the flickering fluorescent lights. He hadn't slept. Not really. He hadn't truly slept in almost 3 years. His worn backpack rested against the wall beside him. An old army green duffel bag served as his pillow whenever he found somewhere safe enough to lie down. Folded neatly inside were 2 shirts, 1 extra pair of jeans, an old field jacket, several military photographs he couldn't bring himself to throw away, and discharge papers that seemed heavier every time he looked at them. At his boots lay Titan. The German shepherd rested with his head across Caleb's feet, amber eyes half closed but never fully asleep. Military working dogs learned long ago that sleep came in pieces, never all at once. Titan's ears twitched toward every sound, the vending machine humming, the distant rolling of luggage, the soft cough of an elderly traveler sleeping across the station. Nothing escaped him. Caleb reached into his jacket pocket and slowly unfolded the last bill he owned. $5. The corners had softened from years of passing through strangers' hands. He turned it over between his fingers. $5 couldn't buy breakfast. It couldn't buy another night in a motel. It certainly couldn't buy a future. He smiled without humor. Funny, he thought. Years ago, the government had trusted him with millions of dollars worth of equipment, classified missions, and the lives of his teammates. Now everything he owned in the world was worth less than the price of a hamburger. Titan lifted his head. Without looking, Caleb scratched behind the dog's ears. "You still believe in me, don't you?" Titan's tail thumped once against the cold tile. That answer never changed. The dog had followed him through deserts halfway across the world, through firefights, explosions, long nights hiding beneath shattered buildings where silence meant survival. And afterward, when the war ended for everyone else, Titan simply kept following. Caleb closed his eyes. The sound came first. Rotor blades, heavy, growing louder. His breathing shortened. "Not here. Please. Not now." Suddenly, the fluorescent lights above seemed to become the spinning blades of a helicopter. The polished tile dissolved into blowing dust. The smell of floor cleaner disappeared beneath smoke, diesel fuel, and burning metal. His heart pounded. Someone was shouting, "Medic! Move! Move! Move!" Caleb's hands tightened around invisible rifle grips. His chest locked. Air refused to come. The panic attack crashed over him with brutal familiarity. Then something warm nudged beneath his trembling hand. Titan. The shepherd stood quietly between Caleb and the world. One paw rested gently on his knee, not pushing, not pulling, simply reminding him where he was. Caleb focused on the dog's breathing, slow, steady, in, out, in, out. The helicopter vanished. The battlefield disappeared. The bus station returned. His heartbeat slowly settled. "Thanks, buddy." Titan leaned his head against Caleb's chest for just a moment before calmly lying back down. No drama, no excitement, just duty. Exactly as he'd been trained. Exactly as he'd always done. Across the station, an elderly janitor noticed the exchange. He quietly walked over carrying a fresh cup of coffee. "Looks like he takes good care of you." Caleb accepted the cup with both hands. "He always has." The old man smiled at Titan. "I've seen a lot of dogs." He paused. "That one's still working." Caleb looked down. "Yeah, he never retired." The janitor nodded as if he understood something most people didn't. Then he simply walked away without asking questions. Caleb sipped the coffee slowly. Warmth spread through cold hands. For a few minutes, the world became manageable again. He pulled his cracked phone from his pocket. Battery, 18%. Free station Wi-Fi connected for a moment before disappearing. Connected again. Dropped. Connected. It reminded him of hope. Always there. Never dependable. He searched jobs first. Warehouse. Construction. Security. Every listing required transportation, an address, references, or an interview scheduled weeks away. Things homeless veterans rarely possessed. He searched apartments. Every result felt like reading a language spoken by someone else. First month's rent, last month's rent, security deposit, credit history, employment verification. He quietly laughed. Titan looked up. "I'm still looking." The dog settled again. Caleb continued scrolling. County surplus auctions, impounded vehicles, old farming equipment, broken trailers. Most listings meant nothing until one photograph stopped him. Not because it looked valuable, because it looked forgotten. The thumbnail showed an abandoned roadside diner somewhere beneath snow-covered mountains. The building leaned slightly beneath a gray Wyoming sky. Broken neon, weathered white siding, an empty gravel parking lot. But something about it, something felt strangely familiar. Caleb tapped the listing. The page loaded painfully slowly. County property auction. Former High Country Diner. Pine Hollow, Wyoming, no reserve. Starting bid. $5 buyer must claim property in person. Property sold as... Is contents included, auction ends today, current bids 0. Caleb blinked. 0? He refreshed. Still 0. He zoomed into the photograph. The diner looked abandoned for decades. Yet, his military instincts noticed details others wouldn't. The windows were dirty, but unbroken. The roof sagged slightly, but evenly. No structural collapse. No obvious vandalism. Whoever had closed the place hadn't fled. They had shut it down carefully. His thumb hovered over the screen. $5. He had exactly $5. Titan suddenly stood. His nose nearly touched the phone screen. Instead of looking at the diner, he stared at the back corner of the building in the photograph. His ears rose. His posture stiffened. A low, uncertain rumble escaped his throat. Caleb frowned. What is it? Titan never growled without reason, especially not at photographs. Caleb enlarged the image. Nothing. Just an old diner. A rusted ventilation pipe. Some weeds. A section of cracked concrete behind the kitchen. Whatever Titan saw, Caleb couldn't. He searched the county records attached to the listing. Everything appeared legitimate. No hidden fees, no reserve price, no mortgage, no active disputes. Just $5. He leaned back in the plastic chair. What exactly was keeping him in Colorado? Nothing. No apartment, no job, no family, no destination. Just memories. And memories traveled remarkably well. Titan quietly rested his head on Caleb's thigh. The shepherd never looked away from the screen. Caleb took a slow breath. Crazy idea. Titan's ears twitched. Probably the worst decision I've ever made. The dog's tail tapped the floor once. Caleb smiled despite himself. Yeah, you've followed me through worse. He pressed the bid button. Confirmation appeared. He entered his name, his information, his final payment method. $5. Submit. The screen froze. Loaded. Spun. For several long seconds, nothing happened. Then, congratulations. You are the winning bidder. Property transfer pending. Please report to Pine Hollow County Clerk's office within 14 days. Caleb stared silently. He refreshed. The message remained. He had just purchased an abandoned diner in Wyoming for $5. The bus station suddenly felt different. Not warmer, not brighter, but somehow less permanent. Titan stood immediately. His tail wagged once, not excited, certain, almost as if he'd known all along where they were going. Outside, dawn finally began pushing pale silver light over the Colorado mountains. The darkness retreated inch by inch across the frozen parking lot. Caleb folded the phone into his pocket. He looked toward the highway stretching north, toward Wyoming, toward a diner no one wanted, toward a photograph that had somehow captured the attention of a retired military dog, toward something he couldn't explain. For the first time in years, the road ahead wasn't empty. It was unknown, and somehow, unknown felt better than hopeless. Caleb stood. Titan rose beside him before being asked. The automatic doors slid open. Cold mountain air rushed inside. Man and dog stepped into the first light of morning together, carrying almost nothing except a backpack, a worn duffel bag, and a destination that made no sense. Behind them, the bus station clock continued blinking beneath tired fluorescent lights. Ahead of them, somewhere beyond hundreds of miles of winding highways and snow-covered peaks, an abandoned diner waited beneath the Wyoming sky. Neither of them knew that everything Samuel Granger had built over 40 years had been waiting for exactly this moment. Neither of them knew that Titan had already seen the first clue, or that $5 was about to become the most valuable purchase either of them would ever make. Morning settled slowly over the Colorado mountains as Caleb Hayes and Titan walked away from the bus station with no real plan except one destination. Pine Hollow, Wyoming. The words still sounded unreal. Caleb checked the balance on his phone one last time. The screen showed exactly what he expected. $0. He slipped the phone back into his pocket before the battery finally surrendered and the screen went black. So now it's just us. Titan looked up at him, his ears forward. Guess it always has been. The first ride came from a rancher hauling fencing supplies north toward Craig. The old pickup rattled over two-lane highways that cut through wide valleys where frost still clung to the sagebrush. Snow rested on distant peaks while golden morning light spread across endless cattle pastures. The rancher introduced himself as Frank. "You military?" he asked after noticing Caleb's posture. "Used to be. Navy? SEAL teams." Frank nodded once. He didn't ask which team. He didn't ask where. He didn't ask what happened. Instead, he reached over and scratched Titan behind the neck. Good dog. Titan accepted the attention politely before returning his eyes to the road. He's still working? Frank asked. Every day. Frank smiled. My brother came home from Vietnam with a shepherd. Folks said the dog kept him alive longer than any doctor did. Caleb looked out the window. I believe that. For several miles, neither man spoke. Sometimes silence was the most respectful conversation strangers could have. By afternoon, the truck reached the edge of Craig. Frank pulled into a gas station. I can't take you farther. You've already done enough. Frank reached behind his seat and handed Caleb a paper sack. Didn't ask whether you needed lunch. Inside were 2 sandwiches, apples, bottled water, and a package of beef jerky. Caleb hesitated. I can't repay. Didn't ask for repayment either. Frank tipped his hat. Sometimes folks just help. Caleb stood there for a moment after the truck disappeared down the highway. He wasn't used to kindness that expected nothing in return. Neither, it seemed, was Titan. The shepherd watched the truck until it vanished around a bend before quietly continuing north beside his partner. By evening, the mountains grew larger. Roads narrowed. Pine forests replaced open pasture. The air became noticeably colder. Caleb and Titan walked until sunset painted the snow-covered peaks orange and purple. They found shelter beneath the roof of an abandoned picnic pavilion beside a frozen creek. Titan circled twice before lying beside Caleb. The veteran unwrapped one of the sandwiches. Half went to Titan. Half stayed with him. You've eaten better. Titan accepted the meal without complaint. The creek murmured beneath a layer of thin ice. Wind whispered through pine branches overhead. For the first time in weeks, there were no sirens, no crowded shelters, no shouting, only wilderness. It should have been peaceful. Instead, sleep brought the battlefield back. Gunfire echoed through mountain silence. Someone screamed for a medic. Smoke rolled across broken buildings. Caleb ran through streets he knew no longer existed, searching desperately for teammates whose names still woke him at night. Then came the explosion. Everything turned white. He jerked awake with a violent gasp. His heart hammered against his ribs. His breathing became short and uneven. The frozen creek was gone. The pavilion disappeared. Only panic remained. Titan was already there. The shepherd pressed firmly against Caleb's chest, interrupting the spiral before it swallowed him completely. Caleb buried trembling fingers into the thick fur around Titan's neck. You always know. Titan remained perfectly still. No barking, no whining, just quiet pressure. Exactly enough. Eventually, Caleb's breathing slowed. He looked toward the eastern horizon, where the first hint of dawn appeared beyond black mountain ridges. I don't know why you stayed. Titan looked into his eyes. Caleb smiled sadly. I guess I never asked. The following days blurred together. A delivery truck carried them across the Wyoming state line. A retired schoolteacher gave them a ride through snow-covered ranch country after Titan politely rested his head in her lap. A volunteer firefighter pointed them toward safer roads after hearing where they were headed. Each person offered something small: coffee, a sandwich, directions, a warm smile. Nothing dramatic, nothing life-changing by itself. Yet somehow those little acts stitched together enough hope to keep moving. Caleb began noticing something strange. Whenever someone approached with genuine kindness, Titan relaxed immediately. But whenever someone smiled without sincerity, Titan stiffened. Twice the shepherd quietly positioned himself between Caleb and strangers whose friendliness disappeared the moment money entered the conversation. Military instincts never really retired. Neither did Titan's. Late on the 4th afternoon, the highway curved around a ridge overlooking a broad mountain valley. A weathered wooden sign stood beside the road. Welcome to Pine Hollow. Population 1,184. Below the sign stretched a small Wyoming town tucked between forests and open ranch land. Wooden storefronts lined a single main street. A church steeple rose above cottonwood trees already bare for winter. Thin columns of smoke drifted from chimneys. Beyond everything stood snow-covered mountains that seemed close enough to touch. "It actually exists," Caleb whispered. Titan wagged his tail once. The town wasn't large, but it felt alive. Children rode bicycles despite the cold. An elderly couple decorated the front of a bakery with evergreen branches. Two mechanics laughed outside a repair garage while replacing tires on an old ranch truck. Life continued here at a pace the rest of the world had forgotten. As Caleb and Titan walked down Main Street, conversations briefly paused. People noticed them, not with suspicion, with curiosity. A tall man carrying feed bags tipped his cap. A woman sweeping snow from a storefront smiled politely. No one stared for long. Small towns noticed everything. They simply didn't make a spectacle of it. The county courthouse stood beside the post office, built of old red brick that had weathered nearly a century of Wyoming winters. Inside, warmth replaced the sharp mountain air. Behind the front counter sat a woman in her 60s with silver hair pulled neatly into a bun. Reading glasses rested low on her nose as she worked through a stack of property files. She looked up. Her eyes settled first on Caleb, then Titan, then the worn backpack, then the combat boots. Finally, she smiled. "Can I help you?" Caleb placed his printed auction confirmation on the counter. "I'm here about a property." She adjusted her glasses. Read the paper once, then again, her eyebrows lifted slightly. "The High Country Diner." "Yes, ma'am." "You actually came." "I bought it." She looked at him carefully, then at Titan. "How far did you travel?" "Colorado." "You walked part of it?" "Most of it." She opened a drawer beneath the counter. Inside rested a plain manila envelope. She held it for a long moment, instead of handing it over. "Young man," her voice softened, "do you know anything about that building?" "Only what's in the listing. No one has lived there in almost 20 years. "I know. The roof should have collapsed years ago." "It hasn't." She studied him with quiet concern. "It sits 4 miles outside town." "I'll find it." She looked at Titan again. The shepherd calmly returned her gaze. Something about the dog seemed to reassure her. Finally, she slid the envelope across the counter. "The keys are inside." Caleb picked it up. It felt surprisingly heavy. "There is one thing," she added. He paused. "Folks around here always wondered why no one ever bought that diner." She folded her hands together. "Now I suppose we're finally going to find out." Caleb thanked her and turned toward the door. As Titan followed, the shepherd suddenly stopped. His ears stood straight. He turned his head toward the east-facing courthouse windows, toward the distant mountains, toward somewhere beyond them. He stared for several long seconds, then quietly continued walking. The county clerk watched him leave. Under her breath, almost too softly to hear, she whispered, "That dog knows something." Neither Caleb nor Titan looked back. Ahead of them, beyond 4 lonely miles of winding road, waited an abandoned diner that had somehow survived 2 decades of silence. And somewhere inside that forgotten building, the first answer was already waiting for Titan to find. The county road left Pine Hollow behind almost immediately. Within minutes, the small town disappeared behind rolling hills covered in sagebrush and towering pines, dusted with fresh snow. The afternoon sun hung low above the Wyoming mountains, casting long blue shadows across the frozen fields. Wind swept through dry grass with a whisper that sounded almost like distant voices. Caleb adjusted the straps on his backpack. "You ready?" Titan looked ahead without hesitation. The German shepherd had been alert ever since they left the courthouse. His ears remained forward, his stride purposeful, as though he already recognized the direction. The walk felt longer than 4 miles. Every bend in the road revealed another stretch of empty landscape. A weathered wooden bridge crossed a narrow creek where thin sheets of ice drifted slowly beneath snow-covered banks. Beyond it stood abandoned fence posts, old cottonwood trees stripped bare for winter, and miles of untouched wilderness stretching toward the mountains. No traffic, no houses, only silence. It reminded Caleb of remote valleys overseas where every quiet moment demanded caution. Old habits returned without permission. His eyes scanned tree lines, roof lines, elevated ground, potential cover, potential danger. He caught himself doing it and gave a quiet shake of his head. The war's over. Titan glanced back, almost as if making sure Caleb believed his own words. The road curved gently around a ridge. Then Caleb saw it. The diner. It stood alone against the immense Wyoming landscape, surrounded by open fields and backed by snow-covered mountains glowing beneath the afternoon light. Time had certainly touched it. The once white paint had faded to soft gray. Chrome trim around the roofline had dulled beneath years of weather. One front window carried a long crack stretching from top to bottom. The neon sign leaned slightly toward the road. High Country Diner. Several letters had gone dark years ago. Tall weeds poked through cracks in the parking lot. Yet, the building remained standing, straight, balanced, proud. It didn't look abandoned. It looked patient. Caleb stopped walking. So that's what $5 bought. Titan ignored the view entirely. Instead, the shepherd trotted ahead, nose already working the cold air. He circled the parking lot once, then again, never wandering randomly, always following invisible trails. Caleb noticed something unusual. There were no signs of vandalism, no broken doors, no graffiti, no shattered furniture visible through the dusty windows. Whoever closed this place had done so carefully, almost respectfully. He climbed the front steps. The brass key felt cold in his hand. The lock resisted. Years without movement had frozen its mechanism. Caleb applied steady pressure. The key finally turned with a heavy metallic click. The door opened slowly. Its hinges groaned through the empty building like a deep breath after 20 years of silence. Dust floated through shafts of afternoon sunlight. The smell surprised him. Not mold, not decay, old wood, coffee, grease that had long ago cooled into memory, and something else. Order. The dining room stretched quietly before him. 8 booths lined the windows. Their red vinyl cushions had faded but remained intact. Chrome edging still reflected faint strips of sunlight. A long counter faced the kitchen. 10 stools stood perfectly aligned. Coffee mugs rested upside down behind the counter exactly where someone had placed them decades earlier. Salt and pepper shakers still occupied every table. Menus remained stacked beside the old cash register. Everything waited, as if the staff had closed one evening expecting to reopen the following morning. Caleb walked slowly through the center aisle. His boots left the first footprints in years. This wasn't abandoned. His voice barely rose above a whisper. It was preserved. Titan continued searching. The shepherd sniffed booth after booth before moving behind the counter. His nose paused briefly near the old coffee station. Then he continued. Kitchen, storage room, pantry. Always moving, always searching. Caleb stepped behind the counter. The coffee maker remained bolted in place. Shelves still held ceramic cups wrapped carefully in newspaper. Drawers contained neatly bundled silverware. Every cabinet appeared organized with almost military precision. He smiled despite himself. Whoever owned this place would have passed inspection. He entered the kitchen. Commercial equipment filled the room. Industrial ovens, a massive flat-top grill, deep fryers, walk-in refrigeration units, heavy stainless steel preparation tables. Dust covered everything, but nothing appeared destroyed. Most surprising of all, every drawer was labeled: utensils, cleaning supplies, electrical, plumbing, maintenance. Caleb ran a finger across one label. Printed, straight, consistent. Someone had believed organization mattered. Someone who understood preparation. He suddenly remembered briefing rooms before missions. Every piece of equipment placed exactly where it belonged. Because one missing tool at the wrong moment could cost lives. His chest tightened unexpectedly. Titan barked once. Short, sharp, not alarm. Attention. Caleb turned. The shepherd stood beside the largest industrial freezer in the back corner. Titan sniffed carefully along its base, then looked directly at Caleb. What? Titan scratched once against the concrete floor, then sniffed again. Caleb walked over. The freezer looked enormous. Its steel sides showed rust near the bottom, but otherwise appeared surprisingly solid. He crouched beside Titan. The dog kept investigating one particular corner. Nothing seemed unusual. Concrete floor, dust, old electrical conduit. Caleb stood again. Maybe there's a mouse. Titan didn't move. Instead, he scratched once more, then sat, waiting. Caleb laughed softly. You've done that before. Years earlier. Afghanistan. Titan had refused to move from a collapsed stone wall until engineers discovered an explosive hidden beneath loose rock. Another time, he'd frozen beside what looked like an abandoned truck. Inside were civilians trapped beneath debris. Twice, Titan had ignored direct commands. Twice, he'd been right. Caleb's smile slowly faded. He trusted the dog with his life, always had. Maybe he should now. He grabbed the freezer handle, pulled. Nothing. It barely shifted. Heavy. Titan stepped backward, giving him room. Caleb repositioned his footing. Years of military training returned instinctively. Legs, not back. Controlled movement. He pulled again with steady force. Metal scraped loudly across concrete. The sound echoed throughout the empty diner. The freezer moved. Only a few inches. But it moved. Dust exploded into the air beneath it. Titan immediately lowered his nose to the newly exposed floor. He followed something invisible. His breathing quickened. Tail stiff. Focused. Caleb leaned closer. The concrete beneath the freezer looked different. Not dramatically. Just smoother. Newer than the surrounding floor. As though repairs had once been made there. He knelt, ran his fingers across the surface. The texture changed beneath his hand. Concrete ended. Tile began. Why would someone place tile beneath an industrial freezer where nobody could ever see it? Titan let out a low, steady rumble. Not fear. Expectation. Caleb slowly stood. He looked around the quiet kitchen, then back at the floor. Something about this place refused to fit together. Nothing felt random. Everything carried intention. Even the silence seemed deliberate. Outside, evening light stretched across the parking lot. Golden sunlight reflected from distant mountains while long shadows crept toward the diner. Inside, Caleb looked from Titan to the hidden section of floor. Then back again. All right. He nodded slowly. I've learned one thing over the years. Titan tilted his head. When you insist this much, Caleb placed both hands firmly against the side of the freezer. I stop asking questions. The heavy steel unit groaned once more as he prepared to push it farther aside. Neither man nor dog realized they were only inches away from uncovering a secret that had remained hidden for nearly 20 years, or that beneath their feet, someone had been waiting for exactly the right person to find it. Caleb planted both boots firmly against the concrete floor, his shoulders pressed against the side of the industrial freezer. The steel cabinet groaned as years of dust and rust protested its first movement in decades. Titan stepped aside but never took his eyes off the corner. One more. Caleb exhaled slowly. With one final push, the freezer slid another 3 feet. Metal scraped across concrete with a sound so loud it echoed through every empty room of the diner. Silence followed. Dust drifted lazily through shafts of evening sunlight. Then Caleb saw it. A square section of bright white tile. Unlike every other worn surface in the kitchen, these tiles looked newer, cleaner. Someone had replaced only this small section of floor. His pulse quickened. No way. He knelt beside the tiled square. His fingers brushed away years of dust until cold metal appeared beneath the grime. A recessed steel ring, perfectly centered. Hidden so carefully it could only have one purpose. Titan stood beside him, tail still, ears locked forward. You knew. The German shepherd never looked away from the floor. Caleb wrapped both hands around the steel ring. It didn't move. He adjusted his grip, pulled harder. Nothing. Years of stillness held the mechanism tightly shut. He leaned back, putting his weight into it. A sharp metallic click echoed beneath the floor. Both man and dog froze. Then, the tiled section lifted slowly. Not just the tiles. An entire steel hatch concealed beneath them. Heavy hinges swung upward with surprising smoothness. Someone had maintained this. A rush of cool, dry air escaped from below. It carried none of the stale smell Caleb expected. Instead, it smelled clean, stored, protected. Titan immediately leaned toward the opening. But instead of charging ahead, he stopped at the edge, waiting. Just as he had done countless times before entering unknown buildings overseas. Caleb smiled faintly, still clearing rooms. He removed the flashlight from his backpack. The beam cut through darkness. Concrete stairs disappeared below. 10 steps, maybe 12. The walls were smooth, poured concrete. Not rough, not improvised. Engineered. He looked down at Titan. What do you think? Titan quietly descended the first step, then stopped again. Waiting. You always let me go first. Caleb shook his head. Guess some habits never change. He started down. Each footstep echoed softly. The temperature dropped several degrees. At the bottom, the flashlight revealed something impossible. The room stretched far beyond the footprint of the diner. Concrete pillars supported an 8-foot ceiling. Heavy-duty steel shelving lined every wall. Everything was organized with astonishing precision. Boxes labeled by category: medical, electrical, water, heating, food storage, blankets, fuel. The flashlight moved slowly across row after row. Cases of bottled water, neatly stacked canned goods, portable stoves, fuel canisters, first aid kits, emergency radios, sleeping bags sealed inside waterproof packaging, axes, chainsaws, generators, tool chests, extension cords, battery packs. Everything looked ready to use. Everything looked inspected. Nothing appeared forgotten. Caleb stood speechless. This isn't a bunker. His voice barely carried through the enormous room. It's a disaster shelter. Titan moved methodically through the space. His nose inspected shelves before continuing deeper. He showed none of the excitement of discovery, only quiet certainty, as though this was exactly what he had expected to find. Caleb approached one shelf. Every can faced outward, labels aligned perfectly, expiration dates marked in careful handwriting, each row organized by year. Military. No civilian stocked supplies like this. His flashlight reached the far wall. A large commercial generator sat bolted to the floor. Nearby rested fuel drums, carefully dated and rotated. Maintenance logs hung neatly beside them, every inspection signed, every replacement documented. Whoever built this place hadn't simply prepared for emergencies, they had expected to maintain it for decades. Caleb walked slowly toward a simple wooden desk positioned beneath a wall-mounted lamp. Unlike everything else in the room, the desk carried signs of frequent use. A pair of reading glasses rested beside an old fountain pen, a brass compass, a folded American flag in a display case, and one thick, leather-bound journal. Titan arrived beside the desk first. The shepherd sniffed carefully, then gently placed one paw against the chair. Caleb reached for the journal. The leather felt worn but carefully preserved. He opened the cover. Inside, the handwriting was neat, measured, military block lettering. The first page read, "If you are reading this, then you found the shelter. I do not know your name. I do not know your story. But I believe you needed this place more than anyone else. My name is Samuel Granger. If Providence has brought you here, then welcome. This place belongs to purpose now." Caleb stopped reading. His throat tightened unexpectedly. He turned another page. The entries stretched back nearly 30 years. Maintenance schedules, generator inspections, inventory updates, storm preparations, notes about replacing batteries, medical supply rotations. Everything recorded with remarkable discipline. Titan wandered farther into the room. Near the back wall, he paused before another shelf. His nose traced along its base, then stopped. Caleb joined him. The shelf held emergency medical equipment, oxygen tanks, trauma kits, wheelchairs still wrapped in plastic, children's blankets, infant supplies. His eyes widened. This wasn't built for one person. He slowly turned in the center of the bunker. This place had been designed for families, for entire communities, for strangers. He looked back toward Samuel's journal. The answer suddenly felt obvious. A soldier. Only another soldier would prepare this way. Not from fear, from responsibility. Caleb returned to the desk and continued reading. The journal's early entries spoke little about Samuel himself. Instead, they described storms, wildfires, road closures, power failures, elderly neighbors living alone, children trapped during blizzards. Every page reflected the same question. What if no one comes in time? The answer was always another improvement. More blankets, better fuel storage, additional medicine, a second generator. Caleb recognized the mindset instantly. Mission planning. Always preparing for what everyone else hoped would never happen. Titan suddenly lifted his head. His ears pointed toward the ceiling. A faint sound drifted through the concrete. Wind. Nothing more. Still, the shepherd quietly returned to Caleb's side. The room felt strangely peaceful, safe, safer than any place Caleb had slept since leaving the Navy. He sat in the wooden chair. The silence wrapped gently around him. No traffic, no shouting, no crowded shelters, only the quiet hum of a place built with intention. He rested one hand on Titan's shoulder. You found it. Titan leaned gently against his leg. For several moments, neither moved. Caleb looked again at the opening page. Welcome. The single word echoed differently than he expected. It wasn't welcoming ownership. It wasn't welcoming curiosity. It welcomed need. Someone had built this place hoping a stranger would someday walk down these stairs. Someone had believed enough in people to spend years preparing for lives they would never meet. Caleb closed the journal carefully. His eyes wandered across the endless shelves one more time. Whatever Samuel Granger had left behind, this was far more than an abandoned diner's hidden basement. It was the unfinished mission of a man who had refused to stop serving after taking off the uniform. And Caleb had only begun to uncover why. The underground shelter seemed untouched by time. Caleb sat quietly at the wooden desk while Titan settled beside his boots, the German shepherd finally relaxing for the first time since they had left Colorado. The thick concrete walls blocked the Wyoming wind, replacing it with a silence so complete that Caleb could hear the turning of each journal page. Samuel Granger had dated every entry, year after year, season after season. Not a diary, a duty log. Caleb recognized the format immediately. Every inspection had been recorded with military precision. Generator tested. Fuel rotated. Medical inventory updated. Water supply inspected. Emergency blankets replaced. Even the batteries inside the flashlights had been changed on a schedule stretching across decades. Samuel had treated preparedness the same way a platoon sergeant treated his soldiers. No shortcuts. No excuses. No assumptions. Caleb turned another page. The handwriting softened slightly. Today, the county lost power for 6 hours after heavy snow. Mrs. Jenkins from the North Ranch had no backup heat. I realized tonight that planning for myself isn't enough. A shelter only matters if other people know they can survive inside it. Tomorrow, I will begin expanding the storage room. Caleb slowly looked around. The room surrounding him had started as something much smaller. Over 30 years, Samuel had enlarged it one careful improvement at a time. Another page. Spring flooding washed out County Road 9. Families were stranded until morning. Added 4 more cots today. Another page. Sheriff says wildfire season may worsen this year. Ordered more medical supplies. Another. The school lost heat again. Purchased children's blankets. Every decision pointed outward. Never inward. Titan rose quietly. Without making a sound, he walked toward the far corner where heavy steel cabinets stood against the concrete wall. He sniffed carefully along the bottom shelf. Paused. Returned. Then scratched once. Caleb smiled. You've found something else. The cabinet doors were locked. Old brass locks secured both handles. Caleb searched nearby drawers. Inside the desk, he found a small ring holding several carefully labeled keys. One tag read simply, Archives. The key turned smoothly. The cabinet opened. Inside were military uniforms preserved inside garment bags, dress blues, old field jackets, service caps, everything protected from dust. On the upper shelf rested shadow boxes containing medals. Bronze Star, Purple Heart. Combat infantry decorations from another era. Beside them sat faded black and white photographs. Caleb lifted the first frame. A much younger Samuel Granger stood beside several soldiers outside a military field hospital during the Korean War. Despite the decades between them, Caleb immediately recognized something familiar. Not the faces, the posture. Every man stood exactly the same way, alert, relaxed, watching. Veterans recognized one another across generations without speaking. Another photograph showed Samuel much older, standing proudly in front of the high country diner shortly after it opened. Children laughed around picnic tables. Truck drivers filled the parking lot. Families crowded the entrance. The place had once been alive. Titan gently nudged another wooden box resting beneath the photographs. Inside lay dozens of neatly bundled letters. Some had never been opened. Others had been answered and carefully tied together with faded blue ribbon. Caleb selected one at random. Dear Mr. Granger, thank you for repairing our generator after last winter's storm. You refused payment again. We don't know how to repay you, but our grandchildren slept warm because of you. God bless. Another. Samuel. The blankets arrived yesterday. The church has enough now. You didn't sign your name, but everyone knows who sent them. Thank you. Another. Mr. Granger, you barely know us, yet you rebuilt our porch after the tornado. Dad says some people never stop serving. I hope I become that kind of man someday. Caleb lowered the letter. The room suddenly felt different. Samuel hadn't simply built a bunker. He had quietly spent decades serving an entire community. No applause, no newspaper articles, no recognition, just work. Titan wandered toward another small storage chest beneath the uniforms. This one wasn't locked. Inside rested military dog equipment, an old leather leash, a worn training sleeve, several faded photographs of German shepherds wearing military harnesses. Caleb picked one up. Samuel, much younger, knelt beside a large shepherd whose muzzle had already turned gray. The old veteran smiled into the camera. Written carefully on the back. Bruno. My best partner. He saved my life twice. I only returned the favor once. Caleb looked toward Titan. The shepherd sat quietly watching him. He remembered long patrols overseas. Titan detecting hidden danger long before anyone else. Titan refusing to abandon wounded teammates. Titan remaining beside Caleb during the evacuation flight home after the mission that ended both their military careers. The army had officially retired the dog. Titan had ignored the paperwork. As far as the shepherd was concerned, he was still protecting his soldier. Caleb gently rubbed the dog's neck. I guess Samuel understood us. Titan leaned against him. Caleb opened the journal again. The entries changed as the years passed. Samuel wrote less about supplies, more about purpose. A soldier spends years preparing for the day something terrible happens. The mistake many veterans make is believing preparation ends when the uniform comes off. Service simply changes shape. The words settled deeply inside Caleb. He continued reading. Many soldiers survive war but never escape it. Some carry wounds no doctor can see. If one of those men ever finds this place, I hope he understands he is not broken. He is simply carrying too much alone. Caleb stopped reading. His vision blurred. He closed the journal for a long moment. Nobody had ever described PTSD that way. Not broken, carrying too much. The difference mattered, more than he expected. Titan rested his head on Caleb's knee. Outside, evening shadows slowly deepened over the mountains. The fading sunlight filtered through the open hatch above, reaching only partway down the staircase before disappearing into darkness. Caleb finally stood. I suppose we should see if the lights still work. He followed Samuel's maintenance notes toward the generator. Every instruction was written with remarkable clarity. Fuel valve, prime switch, battery connection, main breaker. Caleb completed each step exactly as described. Then he pressed the starter. The engine coughed once, twice, then settled into a deep, steady rumble. A second later, warm yellow lights flickered to life throughout the bunker. One by one, bulbs illuminated every aisle. The room transformed. No longer a forgotten underground chamber. Now it looked exactly as Samuel had intended. Ready. Waiting. Alive. Warm air began flowing softly through ventilation ducts hidden overhead. Titan walked calmly beneath the lights, his tail moving gently from side to side. For the first time since leaving the Navy, Caleb found himself standing inside a place built with the same principles that had once given his life meaning. Preparation. responsibility, service, purpose. He looked once more at Samuel's journal resting open on the desk, then toward the old diner waiting silently above them. The building wasn't asking to be sold. It wasn't asking to be abandoned. It was asking to be continued. Caleb took a slow breath. I think... He looked down at Titan. We're staying. The German shepherd's ears lifted. His tail struck the concrete floor twice, not with excitement, with certainty, as if he had known the answer long before Caleb finally spoke it aloud. The next morning arrived wrapped in pale blue light. Frost covered the diner's windows in delicate patterns that caught the sunrise like etched glass. Beyond the parking lot, the mountains glowed gold beneath fresh snow, while the fields surrounding the old building remained silent, except for the occasional call of a raven drifting across the valley. Caleb stepped outside carrying a broom he had found in the utility closet. Its wooden handle was worn smooth from years of use. Someone had swept these floors every morning once. He started with the front porch. Dust became small clouds in the cold air. Dead leaves gathered into piles. Broken branches disappeared one by one. Titan patrolled the edge of the parking lot, occasionally lifting his nose into the wind before continuing his careful inspection. Even cleaning felt different here, not like fixing someone else's property, like honoring someone's work. By noon, the front entrance looked 10 years younger. The faded windows allowed sunlight into the dining room once again. Caleb stood back. It still has good bones. Titan barked once in agreement. The sound echoed across the empty valley. Half an hour later, another sound answered. An old pickup truck approached slowly along the county road. Caleb instinctively stiffened. Titan immediately stepped beside him. Not aggressive, protective. The truck rolled into the parking lot and stopped. An elderly woman climbed out carrying 2 large grocery bags. She was small, perhaps in her 70s, with silver hair tucked beneath a knitted cap. Her heavy coat had seen many Wyoming winters, and her boots were covered in dried mud from ranch roads. She smiled first at Titan, then at Caleb. You must be the young veteran everybody's talking about. Caleb looked surprised. Everybody? She laughed softly. Honey, there are only about 1,200 people in Pine Hollow. She extended one gloved hand. Dorothy Mills. Caleb shook it. Caleb Hayes. I know, you do? The county clerk called me yesterday. She looked toward the diner. Couldn't believe somebody actually bought Samuel's place. Her eyes wandered over the clean porch. You've already started. I figured someone should. Dorothy nodded slowly. He would have liked that. She lifted one grocery bag. I brought coffee. The second bag, and enough food for 2 days. Caleb immediately shook his head. I can't take... You can. Her voice remained gentle. But listen carefully. She looked him directly in the eye. This isn't charity. She pointed toward the diner. I worked behind that counter for 23 years. Caleb followed her finger. When Samuel hired me, I was a widow with 2 little boys. She smiled at an old memory. He paid me before I even learned where the coffee filters were. She handed Caleb the bags. I'm simply returning something that was once given to me. For several moments, neither spoke. Finally, Caleb accepted them. Thank you. Dorothy glanced at Titan. And thank your partner. Caleb looked confused. She chuckled. That dog would have chased me off already if he thought I meant you harm. Titan calmly sat beside Caleb, satisfied. Dorothy stepped inside the diner. The moment she crossed the doorway, she stopped. Her eyes slowly traveled across the booths. The counter. The kitchen passed through. The sunlight falling through clean windows. She reached out and gently rested her hand on one of the red vinyl booths. I thought I'd never see this place again. Her voice grew quiet. We used to serve breakfast before sunrise. She smiled. Truckers knew Samuel started the coffee at 4 every morning. She looked toward the kitchen. Best cinnamon rolls in 3 counties. Caleb listened without interrupting. Memories belonged to those who carried them. Dorothy walked behind the counter. Her movements became almost automatic. She opened drawers, checked cabinets, laughed softly when she found stacks of coffee mugs exactly where she'd left them. He never changed anything. Caleb smiled. He organized everything. That was Samuel. She opened another cabinet. Plates here. Another. Cups there. Another. Cleaning supplies under the sink. Everything remained exactly where she expected. It's like he stepped outside yesterday. Titan quietly wandered between the booths. Several times Dorothy watched him. Military? Retired. She shook her head. No. She smiled. I've met retired dogs. She looked toward Titan. That one still reports for duty every morning. Caleb laughed. So do I. By afternoon, another pickup truck arrived. This one carried ladders, toolboxes, and enough grease stains to identify its owner before he stepped out. The man was broad-shouldered, perhaps in his early 50s, wearing an old flannel jacket with a mechanic's patch stitched above one pocket. Ben Carter. He nodded toward Caleb. Owned the repair garage in town. Caleb introduced himself. Ben looked at the diner, then at the broom, then at the cleaned windows. Finally, he pointed toward the roof. You know that gutter's about to fall? Caleb looked up. I noticed. You planning to fix it? Eventually. Ben scratched his beard. Eventually becomes expensive. Without another word, he opened the truck bed. Ladders, hammer, replacement brackets. Titan watched him carefully. The shepherd walked over, sniffed Ben's hand, then calmly returned to Caleb's side. Ben smiled. Guess I passed inspection. Caleb nodded. He doesn't miss much. For the next 3 hours, they worked together. Neither man talked much. Veterans often appreciated people who understood silence. By sunset, the loose gutter had been repaired. Rainwater would once again drain away from the building. Ben climbed down the ladder, roofs still solid. He wiped his hands. Surprised me. Caleb looked upward. It surprised me too. Ben loaded his tools, then paused. You know why Samuel built this place out here? Caleb shook his head. No. So travelers always had somewhere warm before crossing the mountain pass. He closed the truck door. My father said Samuel believed roads existed to connect people. Ben looked toward the highway disappearing beyond the hills. Guess that's still true. He drove away. The parking lot became quiet again. Caleb carried the groceries inside. Coffee brewed for the first time in nearly 20 years. The rich aroma slowly filled the diner. Titan lay beneath one of the front booths, watching, guarding, waiting. As evening settled across Pine Hollow, another vehicle stopped. This one carried a sheriff's star on the driver's door. A woman stepped out wearing a tan jacket over her uniform. She removed her hat before entering. Sheriff Rachel Monroe. She appeared to be in her 40s, composed, observant, with the calm confidence of someone trusted by an entire county. She noticed the fresh coffee immediately. Smells like this place remembers what it was. Caleb offered her a mug. She accepted. After one sip, she smiled. Dorothy's coffee? She stopped by. I figured. Rachel walked slowly around the dining room. I wanted to meet you before rumors did. Caleb raised an eyebrow. There are rumors already? She laughed. Small towns create those before breakfast. She became serious. I also wanted to thank you. For what? She looked toward Titan. Buying this place? Caleb frowned. I don't understand. Rachel rested one hand on the back of a booth. There are buildings. She paused. And there are places. Her eyes drifted around the diner. This has always been one of the places. She turned back toward Caleb. I'd hate to see it disappear. Titan quietly approached the sheriff. She knelt without hesitation. The shepherd sniffed her hand, then gently leaned into her shoulder. Rachel smiled. I'll take that as approval. Caleb noticed something unusual. For the first time since leaving the Navy, he wasn't alone. One day earlier he had arrived with $5, an old backpack, and nowhere to belong. Now strangers kept appearing, not asking what he had lost, only offering what they could give. As darkness settled outside, warm light spilled from the diner's front windows for the first time in decades. Drivers passing along the lonely county road slowed almost instinctively. Some simply looked. Others smiled. The old building no longer felt abandoned. It felt awake. Caleb stood beside the front window with Titan sitting quietly at his side. He looked across the empty parking lot, toward the mountains disappearing beneath the evening sky. For the first time since coming home from war, the future no longer looked like something to survive. It looked like something worth building. For nearly 3 weeks, life settled into a rhythm Caleb Hayes had almost forgotten was possible. Every sunrise began with Titan making his quiet rounds around the diner before returning to the front porch to wait for Caleb. Coffee brewed before daylight, the old American flag Dorothy had found. Folded inside a storage cabinet now hung beside the entrance after Caleb carefully repaired its torn stitching. The neon sign still didn't work. Neither did half the kitchen equipment. But every day, something improved. Every day, another layer of dust disappeared. Every day, another piece of Samuel Granger's dream returned to life. Word traveled farther than Caleb expected. Truck drivers began stopping simply to ask when the diner would reopen. Hunters passing through offered spare lumber. A local electrician volunteered to inspect the wiring. Children riding bicycles slowed just to wave at Titan, who had somehow become the unofficial greeter of Pine Hollow. The German shepherd never barked without reason, never begged, never wandered. Instead, he calmly watched every newcomer before deciding whether they belonged. His judgment quickly earned the town's trust. If Titan likes someone, Dorothy joked one afternoon, the rest of us probably should. Caleb laughed more often now. Not loudly, not for long, but enough for people to notice. Even his nightmares became slightly less frequent. The bunker remained hidden beneath the kitchen. Only Caleb, Titan, Sheriff Rachel Monroe, Dorothy Mills, and Ben Carter knew it existed. Together they agreed to protect Samuel's secret until they understood exactly why he had built it. Some legacies deserved patience. One crisp October morning, Sheriff Monroe parked outside the diner with an expression Caleb immediately recognized. Something was wrong. She removed her hat before speaking. You've got visitors coming. Caleb set down the paintbrush he had been using to restore the front door. Who? Rachel looked toward the highway. They're not from around here. Almost on cue, 3 black luxury SUVs appeared over the distant hill. They looked strangely out of place against the weathered barns, grazing cattle, and snow-covered peaks. Titan rose instantly. His ears stood forward. Every muscle became alert. The vehicles rolled into the parking lot in perfect formation. The doors opened. Men in expensive suits stepped out first, then a woman. She appeared to be in her late 30s, dressed in a charcoal wool coat despite the bright morning sun. Every movement carried confidence sharpened by years of boardrooms instead of ranches. She removed a pair of dark sunglasses. Her eyes studied the diner. Then Caleb. Finally Titan. "You must be Mr. Hayes." Her voice was calm, professional. Caleb nodded. "I'm Caleb." She extended a hand. "Victoria Lawson." He shook it. Her grip was firm, controlled. "I represent the Granger family estate." Dorothy, who had been sweeping the porch, quietly stopped moving. Rachel folded her arms. Ben, working beneath the hood of an old delivery truck nearby, slowly stood. Nobody spoke. Victoria glanced toward the freshly painted windows. "You've done impressive work." "Thank you. I'm afraid that's going to complicate things." Caleb frowned. "What things?" One of the attorneys stepped forward, carrying a leather folder. Victoria accepted several documents before handing them to Caleb. "We believe significant legal errors occurred during the county auction." Caleb looked down. The first page bore the heading, "Notice of Property Ownership Dispute." His stomach tightened. "What exactly are you saying?" Victoria remained composed. "We're requesting that ownership of this property be reviewed. I bought it legally, so the county believes. And you?" She hesitated. "I believe the circumstances deserve further examination." Titan quietly moved beside Caleb. His body positioned itself between the lawyers and his partner without a single command. One attorney instinctively stepped backward. Victoria noticed. Remarkably disciplined. He knows when people are under stress. She looked directly at Caleb. "I imagine both of you have experienced plenty of that." Caleb said nothing. Victoria continued. "The diner itself isn't the primary issue." "What is?" She looked across the surrounding land. "The location." Rachel's expression hardened. Victoria pointed toward the valley stretching below Pine Hollow. "A regional development project has been approved." She unfolded a large survey map. Colored sections covered nearly the entire valley. Hotels, retail space, a conference center, new highway access, residential neighborhoods. Only one parcel remained untouched. The diner, its surrounding acreage. Caleb stared at the map. "This little place?" Victoria nodded. "It occupies the final piece required for construction." Ben stepped closer. "So somebody suddenly remembered Samuel owned it." Victoria answered honestly. "Yes." Dorothy shook her head. "Funny how nobody cared while the roof leaked." Victoria's expression softened briefly. "I understand how this appears." "No," Dorothy replied quietly. "I don't think you do." The attorney interrupted. "The property's estimated value now exceeds $12 million. Silence settled across the parking lot. Even the wind seemed to stop. $12 million. Caleb looked back at the faded diner, at the repaired porch, at the windows he had spent days cleaning. He remembered arriving with $5, a backpack, Titan, nothing else. Now people were telling him he stood on land worth more money than he could even imagine. Victoria watched his reaction carefully. "I'd like to resolve this without unnecessary conflict." "What does that mean?" "We're prepared to discuss compensation." "I'm not selling. You haven't heard an offer. I don't need to." Titan remained perfectly still beside Caleb, watching, listening, protecting. Victoria studied the dog. "You're making an emotional decision." Caleb looked toward the mountains, then the diner, finally back at her. "No." His voice stayed calm. "I'm making the first good decision I've made in years." Her attorneys exchanged glances. Victoria sighed. I was hoping you'd say something else. So was I. She accepted another folder from one of the lawyers. Then I'll have to proceed formally. She handed Caleb another document. A court summons. Hearing scheduled. Property ownership under judicial review. 30 days. Rachel immediately stepped beside Caleb. I'll make sure he has proper legal counsel. Victoria nodded respectfully. I expected you would. She looked once more toward the diner. My grandfather loved this place. Dorothy answered before Caleb could. If he loved it. She paused. Why did he let it disappear? For the first time, Victoria had no immediate answer. She lowered her eyes. I wish I knew. The convoy departed as quietly as it had arrived. Dust settled slowly across the empty parking lot. Nobody moved for nearly a minute. Ben finally broke the silence. $12 million. Dorothy shook her head. They're not after the diner. Rachel folded the survey map closed. They're after what's underneath the contracts. Caleb looked toward the kitchen, toward the hidden bunker resting silently below the floor, toward Samuel's journals waiting downstairs. Something didn't fit. Samuel had planned every shelf, every supply, every detail. Could a man that careful accidentally lose his property for $5? The thought refused to leave him. Titan suddenly stood. The shepherd walked to the front edge of the property where fresh survey stakes had been driven into the ground earlier that morning. He sniffed one, then another. Finally, he looked back toward Caleb. His posture changed. Alert, uneasy, not because of the wooden stakes, because of the strangers who had planted them. Caleb slowly walked over. He knelt beside Titan. You don't trust them. Titan didn't bark. He simply kept watching the distant highway where the black SUVs had disappeared beyond the hills. Caleb rested one hand against the dog's neck. I don't think I do either. Behind them, the restored American flag fluttered above the old diner. Ahead of them stretched a valley suddenly worth millions, and somewhere beneath their feet rested a secret that powerful people clearly did not yet understand. The battle for the diner had begun. This time, Caleb wasn't fighting for survival. He was fighting for a purpose that finally felt bigger than himself. The legal papers remained folded on the counter for 2 days before Caleb finally opened them again. Not because he was avoiding the fight, because he understood something the Navy had taught him years earlier. You never rushed toward a battlefield without first understanding the terrain. Titan lay beneath the front window, watching the empty highway. Every passing truck lifted his head. Every unfamiliar vehicle earned a careful stare. He had sensed the change long before any human could explain it. The diner was no longer forgotten, and forgotten places were often the safest. Samuel Granger's journal rested open beside Caleb's coffee mug. He reread page after page beneath the warm light hanging over the counter. Generator maintenance, fuel rotation, medical inventory, water purification, emergency shelter procedures. Every section had been written with military precision. Every checklist reflected experience earned somewhere far beyond Wyoming. Samuel hadn't simply built a bunker. He had created a plan, a complete one. Rachel Monroe arrived shortly after sunrise carrying weather reports instead of conversation. She spread several printed maps across the counter. The National Weather Service upgraded it overnight. Caleb studied the maps. A deep Arctic system stretched across Wyoming. Projected snowfall, wind speeds, temperature collapse. Rachel pointed toward Pine Hollow. They're calling it the strongest early-season blizzard in nearly 30 years. Ben Carter whistled quietly. Dorothy frowned. When? Rachel looked out the window. Tomorrow evening. Silence settled inside the diner. Outside, the mountains looked peaceful, almost gentle, the kind of beauty that hid danger beneath perfect skies. Caleb glanced toward Titan. The dog had already stood, watching the western ridgeline. His ears remained fixed toward something only instinct seemed able to hear. "He knows," Caleb said quietly. Rachel followed his gaze. "I believe he does." The next 24 hours became organized chaos. Samuel's journal transformed from history into instruction. Caleb checked fuel tanks exactly as Samuel described. Ben serviced the generator. Dorothy inventoried canned food. Rachel coordinated emergency contacts with the county. Titan accompanied everyone, never idle, always watching. When Caleb carried blankets from the bunker upstairs, Titan inspected every staircase. When Ben tested ventilation systems, Titan searched each hallway. When Rachel checked emergency radios, Titan waited beside the door facing the highway. The old German shepherd behaved exactly as he once had before difficult combat missions. Caleb recognized every movement, every pause, every careful glance. Titan wasn't nervous. He was preparing. Late that afternoon, Caleb climbed onto the diner roof to inspect loose flashing before the storm. The wind had already begun changing, colder, sharper. The mountains disappeared behind fast-moving gray clouds. Far below, Pine Hollow looked unusually busy. Pickup trucks loaded with firewood, families buying supplies, livestock being moved into sheltered barns. The entire valley understood what was coming. Caleb tightened one final roof bracket before climbing down. Titan met him immediately. Without warning, the dog pressed firmly against Caleb's leg, grounding him. A low helicopter passed somewhere beyond the mountains. The deep rotating sound echoed through the valley. Instantly, Caleb's vision narrowed. Afghanistan, rotor wash, dust, smoke, radio traffic, someone screaming for a medic. His breathing quickened. His hands trembled. Titan moved closer, one firm shoulder against Caleb's knees. The familiar pressure interrupted the spiral before it fully formed. Caleb closed his eyes, focused on the dog's breathing. In, out. Steady. Safe. When he finally opened his eyes again, the mountains had returned. The diner stood exactly where it always had. Rachel watched quietly from the porch. "You okay?" Caleb nodded. "Better than I would have been 6 months ago," she smiled. "That's progress." He looked down at Titan. "No." He scratched behind the shepherd's ears. "This is progress." The storm arrived just after sunset. It announced itself first with wind, long, low whistles rolling across empty ranch land. Then snow, small flakes, then larger ones, then sheets of white racing sideways through darkness. By 8 o'clock, visibility had fallen below 100 feet. By 9, the highway vanished completely. Power failed across Pine Hollow at 9:17 p.m. The lights flickered once, twice, then darkness. Without hesitation, Caleb looked toward the kitchen. Generator. Titan was already moving. They descended into the bunker together. Ben followed, carrying flashlights. Rachel sealed the heavy hatch behind them. Caleb opened Samuel's journal directly to the bookmarked page. Emergency power activation. Every instruction remained exactly where Samuel had left it. Fuel valve, pressure check, ignition switch, voltage confirmation. Caleb followed each step. The generator rumbled once, twice, then roared to life. Warm yellow lights filled the bunker. Moments later, heat began flowing through hidden ducts beneath the diner. Samuel's system worked perfectly, just as he had promised decades earlier. For nearly an hour, everything remained quiet. Wind battered the building overhead. Snow hammered against reinforced walls. Inside, warmth held. Then came the knock. 3 hard strikes. Rachel looked toward the ceiling. Another knock, then another. She climbed upstairs. Caleb followed. When Rachel opened the front door, icy wind exploded inside. Sheriff's Deputy Luis Ortega stumbled through the entrance, covered in snow from head to boots. His face was pale. Power's gone everywhere. Rachel steadied him. How bad? Worse than expected. He caught his breath. County shelter lost backup heat. What about the school? Generator failed. The nursing home? Heating system froze. Caleb looked toward the blizzard. What do you need? Luis met his eyes. I heard rumors. What rumors? That this place has a bunker. Rachel hesitated only briefly. It does. Luis nodded. We've got elderly residents trapped. Families, kids. People aren't going to make it through this night without heat. The room fell silent. Caleb slowly turned toward the hidden staircase, toward Samuel's journal, toward shelves filled with blankets, food, water, medicine, and decades of preparation. He remembered Samuel's words. A soldier never truly stops serving. He looked at Rachel. How many? We don't know. Bring everyone. Rachel blinked. You sure? Caleb answered without hesitation. That's why Samuel built it. Rachel grabbed her radio. Luis turned back into the storm. Within 30 minutes, headlights began appearing through the white darkness. Sheriff's cruisers, pickup trucks, snowmobiles, neighbors helping neighbors. The first arrivals were 2 elderly sisters wrapped in quilts, then a young couple carrying an infant, then ranchers, children, veterans, teachers, families with frightened dogs, people who had never before stepped inside the old diner. Titan greeted every single one, calmly, patiently. He sniffed frightened children before gently leaning against them. He walked beside elderly residents descending the bunker stairs. One little boy crying uncontrollably stopped the instant Titan rested his head against his shoulder. The tears disappeared. So soft, the child whispered. Caleb smiled for the first time that night. Blankets came off Samuel's shelves, soup heated on portable stoves, sleeping bags spread across the concrete floor. Generators hummed steadily beneath bright lights. The bunker transformed into exactly what Samuel had imagined. Not a hiding place, a refuge. By midnight, 34 people filled the underground shelter. Every sleeping bag was occupied, every heater running, every corner alive with quiet conversations. Outside, the storm continued raging. Inside, strangers shared coffee. Children laughed softly. Old ranchers swapped stories. Fear slowly gave way to gratitude. Rachel stood near the entrance, counting names. We've got everyone. She paused, except one. Caleb looked up. Who? Rachel's expression darkened. Victoria Lawson. Silence returned. She left Cheyenne this afternoon. Luis lowered his voice. She insisted on driving out before the hearing. Rachel stared at the storm beyond the open doorway. Last highway patrol report placed her somewhere east of Miller Pass. Caleb understood immediately. That stretch of road crossed open country, no shelter, no trees, no protection from wind. Titan suddenly stood, his ears locked toward the storm outside. Every muscle tightened. The old combat dog wasn't reacting to thunder or wind. He was listening for someone who hadn't come home. Caleb slowly reached for his winter coat. Rachel met his eyes. You can't be serious. He zipped the coat. If she's still out there. Rachel interrupted. She tried taking everything from you. Caleb nodded once. I know. The sheriff watched him for several seconds. Then she looked at Titan. The German shepherd never took his eyes off the blizzard. As if somewhere beyond the white darkness, someone was waiting, and he already knew they still had time. Titan stood perfectly still at the doorway, his eyes fixed on the white curtain of snow beyond the porch. The wind screamed across the valley with a force that erased roads, fences, and landmarks beneath waves of drifting powder. Caleb understood that look. He had seen it in Afghanistan, in the mountains, in villages where Titan had sensed danger minutes before any human noticed it. The dog wasn't guessing. He had already made a decision. Caleb fastened the final buckle on his heavy winter jacket and reached for a coil of climbing rope stored inside Samuel Granger's bunker. Rachel Monroe caught his arm. "You know what you're walking into." "I do. Visibility is almost zero." "I know. You could disappear out there." Caleb looked toward the crowded bunker where frightened children slept beneath Samuel's blankets and elderly couples warmed their hands around steaming cups of soup. Then he looked back at the storm. If someone is still alive, they're counting on somebody to come. Rachel held his gaze for several seconds before nodding. "So we do it right." Within minutes, 5 people assembled inside the diner. Caleb, Sheriff Rachel Monroe, Deputy Luis Ortega, Ben Carter, and old rancher Thomas Ellis, who had spent 40 winters rescuing stranded travelers along Wyoming roads. Thomas unrolled a county map across the counter. The last patrol report placed her somewhere near Miller Pass. Ben frowned. "That's 6 miles, in good weather." Thomas looked toward the windows where nothing could be seen beyond swirling white. "Tonight, it'll feel like 60. Titan waited beside the door. Calm. Focused. Every few seconds, he lifted his nose into the air, testing scents carried by impossible winds. Caleb clipped the long rope through everyone's safety harness. "No one breaks formation." Thomas nodded. "If somebody falls, everybody stops." Rachel checked her radio. Mostly static. Communication had become unreliable. "We move by compass." Caleb looked at Titan. "You lead." The German shepherd stepped into the blizzard without hesitation. The others followed. Instantly, the world disappeared. Snow struck sideways with enough force to sting exposed skin. Wind howled through the empty valley like something alive. Each breath burned. Each step disappeared behind them within seconds. Thomas walked directly behind Titan. "I've never seen a dog work scent in weather like this." Caleb answered quietly. "He's done harder." The old rancher glanced back. "You two served together?" "For 7 years." Thomas nodded with quiet respect. "I can tell." The team advanced slowly. Compass checks every 100 yards. Constant verbal contact. Still here. Still moving. "I'm good." The rope connecting them remained tight. Their lifeline. Their promise. 40 minutes passed. Maybe 50. Time became meaningless inside the storm. Then Titan stopped. Not uncertainly, abruptly. His ears stood forward. He turned sharply toward a shallow drainage ditch invisible beneath drifting snow. Caleb immediately trusted him. "What is it?" Titan barked once. Short, sharp. The kind of bark Caleb hadn't heard since combat deployments. Target located. Everyone spread carefully while maintaining the rope. Flashlights cut narrow tunnels through blowing snow. Nothing. Then, a dark shape beneath a growing drift. Rachel hurried forward. Oh God. Half buried beneath snow lay a black luxury SUV. The engine silent, windows frozen solid. Ben forced open the driver's door. Empty. Thomas cursed softly. She tried walking. Caleb already knew. People trapped in storms often believed help was closer than it really was. Titan circled once around the vehicle, then lowered his nose. Without waiting for commands, he began tracking. Southwest, into open country. Caleb followed instantly. Stay with him. The German shepherd moved with astonishing confidence despite impossible conditions. Every few yards, he checked the scent, adjusted direction, continued. 5 minutes later, nothing. 10 minutes, still nothing. The wind intensified. Rachel shouted over the roar, "We're losing light!" Then Titan froze. Every hair along his back lifted. He lunged toward a shallow depression hidden beneath a twisted fence line. Snow covered almost everything, except one gloved hand. Caleb dropped to his knees. Victoria Lawson lay curled against the frozen ground, unconscious beneath layers of snow. Her face had gone dangerously pale. Ice covered her eyelashes. Her breathing, barely visible. "She's alive," Rachel shouted. "But not for long." Thomas immediately spread an emergency blanket. Ben checked for injuries. Luis radioed their position, though static swallowed most of the transmission. Caleb removed his own insulated outer jacket and wrapped it around Victoria. Rachel looked at him. "You'll freeze. I'll walk." "Caleb, we're wasting time." They lifted Victoria carefully. Ben and Thomas supported most of her weight. The journey back began. Slow, painfully slow. The storm fought every step. Visibility shrank to only a few feet. The rope stretched tight between exhausted rescuers. Titan stayed ahead, never leaving the trail. Halfway back, the sound came. A deep mechanical thump. Rotor blades, somewhere above, hidden by clouds. The noise hit Caleb like an explosion. Darkness, dust, gunfire, smoke, blood, someone screaming his name. The frozen Wyoming valley vanished. Afghanistan swallowed him whole. His breathing became ragged. His vision tunneled. His hands refused commands. He stopped walking. Rachel turned. "Caleb." No response. He stared through the storm without seeing it. Titan reacted instantly. The German shepherd doubled back and slammed his shoulder hard against Caleb's legs, once, twice, then rose onto his hind legs, placing both front paws firmly against Caleb's chest. Direct pressure. Grounding. Exactly as military trainers had taught him years before. Caleb blinked. Still lost. Titan whined softly. Not fear. Recognition. "Stay here. Stay with me." The dog pressed his forehead against Caleb's. Warm breath. Steady heartbeat. Familiar scent. Caleb closed his eyes. One breath. Then another. The helicopter faded. The gunfire disappeared. The mountains slowly returned. Snow. Wind. Rachel. Titan. "Reality, I'm back," Caleb whispered. Rachel nodded without judgment. "Good." Thomas adjusted Victoria's blanket. "Then let's get home." The final mile felt endless. Every muscle burned. Ice formed along beards, eyebrows, collars. Ben nearly slipped twice. Luis stumbled once before the rope caught him. Titan never slowed. Then, a faint glow appeared ahead. Golden light beneath the storm. The diner. Samuel Granger's bunker warming the valley beneath layers of snow. Hope. As they reached the porch, the front door burst open. Dorothy hurried forward with blankets. Volunteers rushed outside. Together they carried Victoria downstairs into the bunker. Warm air surrounded them immediately. The difference felt almost unreal. Children watched silently as adults cleared space near the generator. Medical supplies appeared. Dry blankets, hot water. Rachel checked Victoria's pulse. "We've got one. Slow, weak, but alive." Caleb leaned heavily against the concrete wall. His hands trembled uncontrollably now that adrenaline had faded. Titan walked over quietly before lowering himself beside Caleb's boots. Only then did Caleb notice blood staining the dog's front leg. He frowned. Titan. During the search, the shepherd had sliced his paw open on hidden barbed wire buried beneath drifting snow. The injury wasn't severe, but he had never slowed, never hesitated. Not once. Dorothy knelt beside him. "You stubborn old soldier." Titan ignored the attention. His eyes remained fixed on Caleb, making certain his partner was truly back. Caleb gently rested one hand on the dog's head. "You saved both of us." The German shepherd closed his eyes for just a moment, as if hearing those words had been enough. Across the bunker, Victoria remained unconscious beneath layers of blankets. She had no idea who had carried her through the storm. She had no idea the veteran she intended to remove from the diner had risked everything to save her life. And when she finally opened her eyes, nothing between them would ever be the same. Victoria Lawson regained consciousness to the steady hum of the generator. For several long seconds, she simply stared upward. The ceiling above her wasn't the polished white ceiling of a hospital. It was poured concrete. Solid. Unfinished. Warm light glowed from industrial fixtures mounted overhead, casting soft shadows across shelves lined with blankets, medical supplies, lanterns, canned food, and neatly labeled storage bins. The room smelled faintly of coffee, clean wool, and engine oil. It smelled alive. She tried to sit up. Pain immediately reminded her how close she had come to dying. A quiet voice spoke beside her. "Easy." Sheriff Rachel Monroe stepped into view carrying a steaming mug. "You've been unconscious for almost 6 hours." Victoria looked around again. "Where am I?" Rachel answered simply. "Exactly where Samuel Granger wanted people to be when they had nowhere else to go," Victoria frowned. "My grandfather?" Rachel nodded. "Beneath his diner?" Victoria stared at her. "What?" Rachel gestured slowly around the bunker. "He built all of this." Victoria looked from shelf to shelf. Generators, medical cabinets, water storage, fuel tanks, emergency radios, rows of carefully organized supplies stretching into the distance. "This," her voice almost disappeared, "has been here the whole time? For decades." Victoria closed her eyes. She suddenly understood why the room felt different. Nothing here had been thrown together. Everything had purpose. Every shelf, every label, every bolt. Everything reflected careful preparation. Military preparation. Footsteps echoed softly behind Rachel. Caleb entered carrying another blanket over one shoulder. Titan limped quietly beside him, his injured paw wrapped neatly with fresh bandages. Victoria immediately recognized both of them. The veteran she had tried to remove, the dog who had silently stood between them days earlier. She looked at Caleb for a long moment. "You came." Caleb nodded. "You were still out there." "I was trying to reach the property." "I know, you saved me." He didn't answer immediately. Instead, he placed the folded blanket near her bed. "This place saved you." Victoria followed his eyes around the bunker. "My grandfather built this." Caleb nodded again. "He never stopped serving." Silence settled between them. Finally, Victoria whispered the question she almost feared hearing answered. "How many people are here?" Rachel smiled gently. 36. Victoria slowly turned. Children slept peacefully beneath thick blankets. An elderly couple shared coffee near the generator. Volunteers quietly prepared soup on portable stoves. A teenage boy carefully read aloud to two frightened younger girls. Neighbors spoke in soft voices. Complete strangers rested side by side without distinction. Nobody looked wealthy. Nobody looked poor. Inside Samuel's bunker, everyone had become simply human. Victoria swallowed hard. "I never knew, no," Caleb said quietly. "I don't think you did." Later that afternoon, as the storm finally weakened above them, Caleb carried Samuel's leather journal to the small metal desk near the generator. He gently placed it before Victoria. "I think he left something for you." She hesitated before opening the worn cover. Samuel's familiar handwriting filled every page. Inventory records, maintenance schedules, emergency plans, then personal reflections. She turned pages slowly. Her grandfather's voice emerged through ink written across decades. He described repairing ranch roofs after storms, helping stranded travelers, keeping fuel stocked for neighbors he might never meet, preparing for emergencies that might never come, serving without recognition, serving because it was right. Victoria continued reading. The entries gradually became more personal. He wrote about aging, about loneliness, about wondering whether purpose could outlive strength. Then she reached an entry dated 18 years earlier. A single name appeared. Clara. She frowned. Who was Clara? She kept reading. Samuel described a young woman who had arrived with nothing except determination. A woman who worked in the diner one unforgettable summer. A woman who reminded him that kindness required action, not speeches, not promises. Action. Victoria looked up. "Who's Clara?" Caleb answered softly. "Nobody in town ever forgot her." Rachel smiled. Samuel certainly didn't. Victoria returned to the journal. Each page deepened the story. Samuel described Clara's compassion, how she remembered every traveler's name, how she quietly gave away meals without embarrassing hungry families, how she stayed late to help elderly customers carry groceries to their trucks. Samuel admitted he had come to love her like the daughter he often failed to understand in his own family. Victoria's breathing slowed. She kept reading. Then came the final section. His handwriting appeared slightly weaker, more fragile. "If you are reading this, then I have probably failed to explain these things while I was alive. If that is true, then that failure belongs to me. Not to you." Victoria blinked. Her grandfather had addressed the words directly to her. He continued, "You may believe I loved this diner more than I loved my family. I understand why. There were years when I spent more time fixing roofs for strangers than sitting at my own dinner table. Years when service became easier than conversation. Years when purpose became an excuse for absence. I cannot undo those choices. But I hope you will understand why I spent my final years trying." Victoria stopped reading. Tears blurred the page. Rachel quietly stepped away, giving her privacy. Caleb remained near the stairs with Titan resting beside him. Neither interrupted. Victoria turned another page. Samuel wrote about Clara again. Then about veterans, about invisible wounds, about men who returned home carrying battles no one else could see. He described believing that communities failed too many of them. He described building the bunker because someday someone broken might arrive needing more than food. They might need purpose. Finally, she reached the final entry. The words Caleb had read days earlier. "I am placing this property into a public auction beginning at $5. Not because it is worth $5, because the person I hope finds it cannot compete against wealth. Only desperation will carry someone far enough to notice what others ignore. Someone with nothing left to lose will understand what this place is truly worth. I trust that person more than I trust inheritance. Victoria covered her mouth. Her hands trembled. The realization struck with overwhelming clarity. Her grandfather had never accidentally lost the diner. He had deliberately released it. He had expected resistance, expected lawsuits, expected anger. He had chosen purpose over family expectations because he believed service mattered more than ownership. Folded carefully inside the journal rested one final envelope. Her name appeared across the front. Victoria. She opened it slowly. Inside was a handwritten letter. My dear granddaughter, if this reaches you after I am gone, then life has unfolded the only way I knew how to leave it. You deserved more of me while I was alive. You deserved a grandfather who attended birthdays instead of repairing barns, who listened more than he lectured, who stayed home once in a while. I know that now. If anger lives in your heart toward me, you have earned it honestly. But I ask one thing. Before you decide whether I failed, look carefully at the person who now owns this place. Not their bank account, not their clothes, not their circumstances. Look at what they choose when someone else needs help. If they open this door to strangers, if they protect people they have no reason to protect, if they carry burdens that aren't theirs, then they belong here. Not because I gave it to them, because they became the kind of person this place was built for. Wealth preserves buildings. Sacrifice preserves purpose. Please choose purpose. Love always. Grandpa Samuel. Victoria lowered the letter into her lap. She didn't cry loudly. Only silent tears rolled down her face. Across the room, Caleb quietly checked Titan's bandage. The old German shepherd watched Victoria without fear, without resentment, simply waiting. As if he had already forgiven someone who had not yet forgiven herself. Victoria slowly stood. Her legs remained weak. She crossed the bunker one careful step at a time until she reached Caleb. For a moment she couldn't find words. Finally, she looked directly into his eyes. I've spent weeks trying to take away the one thing my grandfather wanted most. Caleb remained silent. She looked toward Titan. He risked his life. Her voice cracked. For me, Caleb rested one hand gently on Titan's neck. That's what he was trained to do. Victoria shook her head. No. She looked around the bunker once more. That's what both of you chose to do. Outside, the wind finally began to fade. Morning light filtered through the snow-covered windows above. The storm was ending. But inside Samuel Granger's bunker, something even more powerful had begun. A woman who came determined to reclaim an inheritance had discovered something infinitely greater than property. She had discovered the purpose her grandfather had spent 40 years protecting. And for the first time in her life, she finally understood why he had trusted a stranger more than his own family. The storm ended quietly, not all at once, but with the slow patience that belongs only to winter. By sunrise, the wind had fallen silent. The mountains emerged again, bright beneath fresh snow that stretched across the valley like untouched linen. From the diner's front windows, Pine Hollow looked transformed. Fences disappeared beneath white drifts. Barn roofs glittered under pale morning light. Smoke rose from chimneys, one careful ribbon at a time. Life was returning. Inside the bunker, people slowly gathered their belongings. Children folded sleeping bags. Neighbors helped elderly residents into heavy coats. Someone brewed another pot of coffee. Someone else laughed for the first time since the blizzard had begun. The fear that had filled the room only hours before had quietly become gratitude. Before anyone left, Sheriff Rachel Monroe climbed onto the small concrete platform beside the generator. She cleared her throat. I know everyone wants to get home. The room settled. But before we do, she looked around the bunker. Every person standing here should remember something. Her eyes found Caleb and Titan. This place saved 36 lives. She paused. But it only happened because one man chose to open the door. Silence filled the bunker. Rachel continued. He could have protected what was his. He could have worried about lawsuits. He could have said no. He didn't. Instead of applause, something quieter happened. Mrs. Evelyn Parker, the oldest resident in town, stepped forward first. She embraced Caleb without saying a word. Then came Thomas Ellis, Ben Carter, Dorothy Mills, parents carrying sleepy children, ranchers, teachers, travelers stranded by the storm. Each one shook Caleb's hand. Many knelt to stroke Titan's thick fur, despite the bandage wrapped around his injured paw. One little girl hugged the German shepherd around the neck. Thank you for finding us. Titan gently licked her cheek. Caleb looked away for a moment. Some battles were easier than accepting kindness. Outside, volunteers spent the next 2 days clearing roads and digging vehicles free from towering snowdrifts. The diner became headquarters for recovery efforts. Coffee never stopped brewing. Samuel's emergency supplies continued serving exactly as intended. Generators powered medical equipment for elderly residents. Blankets warmed families whose furnaces remained frozen. Nobody spoke about ownership anymore. They spoke about neighbors. Victoria stayed, not because anyone asked her to, because leaving felt impossible. She spent hours reading every page of Samuel's journals. Sometimes she cried. Sometimes she smiled. Most often, she simply sat quietly at the metal desk, absorbing decades of wisdom written by a man she had never fully understood while he was alive. Late one afternoon, she approached Caleb, who was repairing one of the front booths. Titan rested nearby, finally allowing Ben to change the dressing on his injured paw. I called my attorneys. Caleb looked up and I ended everything. He waited. The lawsuit, the ownership challenge, the injunction, all of it. She placed a thick folder onto the counter. Every filing has been withdrawn. Caleb stared at her. You don't have to do that. Yes. She smiled sadly. I really do. She looked around the diner. I spent my life believing my grandfather left me nothing. Her eyes settled on Samuel's photograph hanging above the counter. It turns out, he left me the chance to become someone better. Caleb extended his hand. Victoria accepted it. No lawyers, no contracts, just two people choosing peace. A week later, the courthouse in Pine Hollow filled once again. This time, the atmosphere felt entirely different. There were no expensive legal teams, no arguments, no raised voices. Judge Eleanor Brooks reviewed the amended filings while adjusting her reading glasses. She looked first at Victoria. Mrs. Lawson, are you confirming these withdrawals voluntarily? I am. You understand they are permanent? I do. The judge nodded. Then she looked toward Caleb. Mr. Hayes. He stood. The court has completed its review of Samuel Granger's will, the county auction, supporting testimony, and subsequent filings. The courtroom became perfectly still. The transfer of Crossroads Diner is hereby affirmed in full. She smiled gently. The property legally belongs to Caleb Hayes. For several seconds, nobody moved. Then Dorothy quietly clapped. Ben joined her. Soon the entire courtroom echoed with warm applause. Not loud, not celebratory, simply grateful. Rachel caught Caleb's eye. You've got a home now. He nodded once. I do. Outside the courthouse, reporters from a regional newspaper asked for interviews. Caleb politely declined. Samuel hadn't built the bunker for headlines. Neither had he. Life slowly settled into a new rhythm. Restoration accelerated. Ben repaired the old kitchen equipment. Dorothy taught Caleb the recipes Samuel had refused to write down completely because, according to Dorothy, some things only make sense when somebody shows you. Thomas rebuilt sections of the porch damaged by years of neglect. Rachel organized volunteer weekends where residents painted walls, repaired windows, and restored the faded parking lot. Every Saturday, more people arrived. Nobody expected payment. Everyone simply wanted to help. Titan became the unofficial supervisor. He wandered carefully through the work crews, accepting scratches behind the ears before moving to the next project. His injured paw healed steadily. Soon he was walking without a limp again. One afternoon, Caleb found Rachel sitting outside watching Titan play gently with several neighborhood children. "He trusts them," she said. Caleb smiled. "They earned it." Rachel nodded thoughtfully. "So did you." She hesitated before continuing. "I've been meaning to ask you something." "What?" "Our Veterans Outreach Counselor comes through Pine Hollow twice a month." Caleb remained quiet. Rachel chose her words carefully. "Nobody expects you to carry everything alone." He looked toward the mountains, toward the valley where silence once frightened him, toward the diner where strangers had become neighbors. "I've spent years believing asking for help meant I failed." Rachel shook her head. "No. It means you're still fighting." Several days later, Caleb parked his old chair inside the counselor's modest office. He almost turned around twice before walking through the door. Titan remained beside him the entire time. The first conversation lasted less than an hour. There were no miracles, no sudden healing, no dramatic breakthroughs. Only honesty. For the first time since leaving the Navy, Caleb spoke openly about the mission that haunted him, about the friends he lost, about the guilt he carried, about the nights he still woke reaching for people who were no longer there. When he walked outside afterward, the mountains looked exactly the same, but something inside him had shifted. The memories remained. They simply weighed a little less. That evening, he returned to the diner. Titan greeted him with quiet excitement before leading him toward the front porch. The sunset painted the Wyoming sky in deep gold and crimson. Inside, volunteers laughed while hanging freshly restored light fixtures. Outside, the old neon sign waited patiently for the final repairs. Caleb rested one hand against the weathered front wall. He realized something Samuel Granger had understood decades earlier. Strength wasn't measured by how much pain a person could carry. It was measured by how much hope they could still create despite it. The diner no longer belonged only to him. It belonged to every traveler seeking warmth, every veteran searching for peace, every child needing safety, every neighbor willing to help another. And somewhere beyond the snowy highway, strangers were already driving toward a place they didn't yet know they would someday need. The light inside Crossroads Diner was ready for them. Just as Samuel Granger had always intended, winter slowly surrendered to spring, and spring quietly gave way to summer. The mountains surrounding Pine Hollow changed from white to deep green. Snowmelt filled the creeks. Wildflowers appeared along the old county road. And every morning before sunrise, one light always came on first. The light above the coffee station. Caleb made certain of that. Samuel's journal had mentioned it only once, tucked between maintenance notes about wiring diagrams and fuel rotation. Leave one light burning before dawn. Not because electricity is cheap, because hope should always be visible from the road. Caleb had smiled the first time he read those words. Now he lived by them. Crossroads. Diner no longer looked abandoned. Fresh white paint covered the weathered walls. The chrome trim reflected morning sunlight again, The cracked parking lot had been repaired with help from half the town. New flower boxes lined the front porch. The old American flag fluttered proudly beside the entrance. Inside, Dorothy's apple pies cooled on the counter every morning. Ben had restored nearly every piece of kitchen equipment. Rachel Monroe stopped by almost every shift for black coffee before patrol. Thomas Ellis delivered fresh eggs every Thursday. Even travelers who had never heard Samuel Granger's name somehow sensed there was something different about the place. People lingered. They talked. They laughed. Nobody seemed eager to leave. Titan noticed every newcomer. He still greeted each person with quiet dignity. Children always found him first. Truck drivers scratched behind his ears before ordering breakfast. Veterans often paused beside him longer than anyone else, perhaps because they recognized something familiar in his steady eyes. Or perhaps because Titan recognized something familiar in theirs. One July afternoon, a young Marine veteran walked through the front door, carrying everything he owned inside a worn backpack. He hesitated just inside the entrance, the same hesitation Caleb remembered feeling months earlier. Titan walked directly to him. No barking, no excitement, just calm recognition. The Marine knelt automatically. The German shepherd rested his head against the young man's shoulder. For several long seconds, neither moved. Caleb watched quietly from behind the counter. Then he poured a fresh cup of coffee. "It's on the house." The young veteran looked up. I don't have any money." Caleb smiled. "I know." The Marine looked confused. "How?" Caleb glanced toward Titan. "He already told me." The young man laughed for the first time in what looked like a very long while. That evening, Caleb unlocked the old storage cabinet behind the counter. Samuel's journal remained exactly where it had always rested. Beside it now sat a second leather-bound journal. New, its pages still mostly blank. Caleb opened Samuel's final entry. "Their names are written by the people who choose to keep serving." He gently turned to the next page. His own handwriting began there. "We kept the door open. 36 people came home during the storm. The diner is alive again. Your mission continues." He closed the journal carefully. Not because the story had ended, because it no longer belonged only to him. Months passed. The diner became more than a restaurant. It became the unofficial heart of Pine Hollow. One room downstairs was converted into a permanent emergency shelter while preserving every detail Samuel had planned. Emergency supplies continued to rotate according to his checklists. Fuel remained full. Medical cabinets stayed organized. Rachel insisted the county include Crossroads Diner in every emergency response plan. "This isn't just a building anymore," she explained during a town council meeting. "It's part of how we protect each other." Nobody argued. Victoria Lawson returned often, not as an owner, as a volunteer. She helped establish the Samuel Granger Community Foundation, funding emergency preparedness programs for rural towns and scholarships for veterans entering public service. She also quietly financed repairs Samuel had never lived long enough to complete. She never asked for recognition. She no longer needed it. One afternoon, she found Caleb repairing an old picnic table behind the diner. "I've been thinking. Dangerous habit." She laughed. "My grandfather spent years believing he had to choose between family and service." Caleb kept sanding the weathered wood. "And?" "I think he was wrong." He looked up. She smiled softly. "You've somehow built both." Caleb followed her gaze. Children chased Titan across the grass. Dorothy and Ben argued good-naturedly about pie recipes. Rachel leaned against her patrol truck, drinking coffee. Thomas unloaded vegetables from his pickup. None of them shared the same last name, yet somehow they had become family. "I think you're right," Caleb admitted. Summer slowly faded into autumn. Then winter returned. Almost exactly 1 year after Caleb had stepped off the bus with $5 in his pocket and nowhere to go. The mountains stood silent beneath fresh snow. Inside the diner, warmth and conversation filled every booth. Near closing time, Caleb carried a small toolbox outside. Titan followed. Together they stood beneath the restored neon sign. Roy's original wiring notes had survived inside Samuel's files, and Ben had finally found replacement tubing that matched the old design perfectly. Caleb flipped the final breaker. Nothing happened. Then, one letter glowed. Then another. Then another. Soft red and white light slowly spread across the Wyoming night. Crossroads Diner. A second line flickered beneath it. Open 24 hours. Caleb stepped back. For a moment he imagined Samuel standing beside him, hands in his pockets, quietly inspecting the work, not looking for perfection, only purpose. Titan sat beside Caleb without making a sound. The old German shepherd lifted his head toward the highway. Headlights appeared in the distance. A single pickup truck, traveling slowly through falling snow. The driver noticed the sign. Brake lights glowed. The truck turned into the parking lot. A tired, middle-aged man climbed out wearing heavy work clothes dusted with snow. He looked uncertain. "You folks still open?" Caleb smiled. "Always." The man hesitated. "I've been driving all day." "You've come to the right place." Titan walked over first. One careful sniff, one quiet wag of his tail. Approval granted. The traveler smiled. "I guess your partner says I'm okay. He usually knows before I do." They walked inside together. Warm air wrapped around them. Coffee waited on the burner. Fresh pie cooled beneath glass. Laughter drifted softly from the kitchen, where Dorothy was finishing one last dessert. Caleb paused before following the traveler. He looked once more at the glowing sign outside, then toward the mountains beyond. A year earlier, he had believed his life ended the day he left the Navy. Now he understood something Samuel Granger had tried to teach through every page of his journal. A soldier's greatest mission is rarely the last battle he fights. It is the first life he helps rebuild after the war is over. Sometimes that life belongs to a stranger. Sometimes it belongs to a community. Sometimes it belongs to himself. Caleb switched off the dining room lights, leaving only the single lamp glowing beside the front window. Exactly as Samuel's notes instructed. A quiet beacon facing the road. Visible through snow. Visible through darkness. Visible to anyone searching for one more chance. Titan settled beside the front door with a peaceful sigh. Caleb rested one hand on the dog's broad shoulders. Neither of them spoke. They didn't need to. Outside, winter stretched across Wyoming. Inside, the coffee stayed warm. The light remained on, and somewhere down that long highway, another weary traveler would someday see that small glow in the distance and realize they were no longer alone. The light never went out. Neither did the promise to keep serving. If you believe a single act of kindness can change someone's life, comment yes below and tell us where you're watching from. And if stories about courage, second chances, and ordinary Americans standing strong mean something to you, subscribe and join us for the next journey.